Let's look at the Celtx interface a little bit before we jump into more specific functions, just to get a rough overview over where all the tools and functions are. When you open up your Screenplay Editor, this is what it looks like. Yours might maybe not look exactly like this one, but it will be more or less similar. The Screenplay Editor usually opens in a new tab, so if you want to go back to your project overview, you can just switch to the other browser tab. Or if you wanted, you could also click on the little arrow in the upper left part of the Screenplay Editor that points to the left. That will take you back to the project view in the same tab. In the bar at the top, you have your menu, and that's the menu that you would normally have right at the top of your screen if this were a real application, so to speak, that you downloaded and installed. But since this is a browser-based app, you see the menu items integrated inside the browser window. Then at the right side of the top bar, you have a share button where you can share your project with collaborators. This sharing thing is usually a little easier in browser-based apps because you can just share links, which you can't do with apps that are installed locally on your computer, at least for the most part. So this is pretty handy. Then next to the share button, you have a comments button, this little speech bubble here, where you can comment on certain areas of the script. And then next to that comments button, you would have a save button, but right now there is nothing to save, so it's grayed out at the moment. Then the subscribe button, hard to miss. If you want to change from the free plan to a subscription plan, you can use that one. And the colored dot at the right side of your top bar gives you access to your plan and your account settings. You can also use this to log out if you like. Then in the bar below the top bar, going from left to right, we have our screenplay formatting elements. You just use this drop-down menu to change the line that your cursor is in right now to one of these elements from the list. You also see the shortcut at the right side of each element, so if you prefer to use those, you'll get used to them pretty quickly. Also, you see at the top of the element drop-down, it says Tab to switch. That is a common way to jump between the most used formatting elements. For example, if you're in a scene heading, the Enter key will bring you to the action element, because that's the one that is usually used right after a scene heading, and then when you hit Tab, you can jump directly to the character element. So just try these out, the Enter key and the Tab key, and see from which element to which element they jump, and you will get the hang of it pretty quickly. Then next to the elements, you have the formatting buttons, the usual bold, italic, and underline, and next to that you have the dual dialog function. In many screenwriting apps, this function is quite hidden, and you really need to know how to get to it from time to time, and you really don't need it that often. But here they put it right at the top in plain sight. Then at the right you have the zoom setting to make the page view bigger or smaller, and you have also a full screen button. This hides the browser application and you only see the Screenplay Editor, which is nice if you don't want to get distracted by other tabs that you might have open at the same time. And at the far right you have a button for undo and redo. Then at the bottom you get some funny statistics about how much of the time you've been writing and how much of the time you've been thinking. Or at least it supposes you're thinking when you're just not writing, which in my case of course isn't the whole truth because, well, I'm talking to you. But anyway, at the right side you get a page count, a word count, and you see when the document has been saved the last time. This would be important, for example, if you lose your internet connection all of a sudden. If you've been writing and you see this last saved has been a while ago, it might not hurt to do an export of your script just to be sure to have a backup. All right, the tools. As you can see, there is a nice little toolbox for quick access here at the right side of the screen, and we will look into different tools and functions in other videos later. But let's just see how this quick access toolbar works. You have all these tools here, like navigation, title page, etc. You can read them all by yourself, and we will look into each one of those. What happens is, when you click on one of them, this toolbox changes to the tool that you selected, and you might or might not, depending on which one you choose, be taken to a completely different page. If you click title page, for example. But you always get this little arrow at the right side of the toolbox header, So to get back to your Screenplay Editor, just click this one and the tool you choose will close and you will be back with your script. All right, this was a rough overview over the Celtx user interface. And now let's go into the different specific functions to see what the application really can do.